Chapter 6: An Unlikely Alliance. The moon hung like a silent sentinel over the ocean, its light casting a silvery sheen across the dark waters. The sea serpent sliced through the gentle swells with a steady grace, its black sails fluttering softly in the night breeze. Captain Mara Hawke stood at the ship's helm, her silhouette outlined against the glowing orb above. The soft lapping of the waves and the distant cries of nocturnal seabirds were the only sounds that broke the silence, creating a serene but tension-filled atmosphere. Mara's sharp eyes were fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts were far from the sea's tranquility. The uneasy truce with Prince Kael, forged under the weight of a shared prophecy, occupied her mind. The encounter with the mermaid prince had been unexpected and fraught with animosity, leaving a lingering friction that neither had fully addressed. The prophecy had bound their fates together, but Mara struggled to reconcile her own goals with the necessity of this reluctant alliance. As the sea serpent continued its course through the moonlit waters, Mara's thoughts churned like the undercurrents beneath. The prophecy spoke of a betrayal and a storm of ruin and redemption, and its implications were far-reaching. She knew that their fates were now intertwined with the dangers lurking in the shadows, but the complexity of their situation left her feeling both apprehensive and resolute. The ocean stretched out endlessly before her, its dark expanse mirroring the uncertainty that lay ahead. The serene beauty of the night was in stark contrast to the turbulent emotions within Mara. She was a pirate accustomed to navigating treacherous waters, but the stakes of this venture were higher than any she had faced before. The looming threat of the assassination plot, combined with the prophecy's ominous forecast, created a sense of urgency that weighed heavily on her. Mara's gaze flickered toward the distant silhouette of the Mermaid Prince's palace, barely visible through the veil of night. She was aware of the delicate balance she had to maintain, not just with Kael but also within her own crew. The alliance with the prince was essential, but it was also a precarious arrangement that required careful navigation. The complexity of their partnership added a layer of intrigue to an already challenging mission. The night wore on, and the soft glow of the moonlight provided little comfort against the pressing reality of their situation. Mara knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was determined to see their mission through. The prophecy had set their course, and despite the personal and political conflicts that remained unresolved, Mara was resolute in her commitment to prevent the impending disaster. As the sea serpent sailed on, Mara's thoughts were a swirl of strategy and apprehension. The uneasy truce with Kael was now an inescapable part of their journey, and the weight of their shared fate pressed heavily upon her. With each passing moment, the urgency of their mission grew, and Mara knew that only by facing the storm together could they hope to safeguard their realms and fulfill the prophecy's promise of both ruin and redemption. Below the surface, in the depths of Atlantea's underwater palace, Prince Kael swam through the grand corridors with an air of grim determination. The shimmering walls of coral and crystal seemed to reflect the tension that had settled over the kingdom. Each stroke of Kael's powerful tail cut through the water with purpose, the soft glow of bioluminescent flora casting eerie shadows that danced along the ornate arches and columns. The once serene palace now felt oppressive, burdened by the weight of the prophecy's ominous promise. The prophecy's chilling message had stirred unrest among his people, amplifying the unease that had begun to simmer beneath Atlantea's tranquil surface. The seer's cryptic words had left an indelible mark on the prince's mind, making it clear that the threat extended far beyond a mere political assassination. The intertwined fates of Eldoria and Atlantia were now at the forefront of Kael's concerns, with the looming disaster threatening to unravel the very fabric of their existence. As Kael approached the royal meeting chamber, his thoughts were a storm of urgency and resolve. He had been preparing for this encounter with Captain Mara Hawke, knowing that their previous hostility would need to be set aside. The gravity of the situation demanded an alliance forged in necessity rather than choice, and Kale was determined to put aside past grievances to focus on the pressing danger that loomed over both realms. The grandeur of the meeting chamber, adorned with the opulent splendor of Atlantean artistry, seemed almost to mock the dire circumstances. The intricate mosaics and shimmering tapestries that usually inspired awe now felt like a backdrop to the impending crisis. Kale's mind was fixed on the need to act swiftly and decisively. He knew that their next steps would be crucial in preventing the assassination plot from coming to fruition. As he prepared for Mara's arrival, Kale's resolve hardened. He was keenly aware that the pirate captain, whom he had once viewed as a threat, was now an essential ally in their quest to thwart the disaster. The upcoming meeting would test their ability to collaborate despite their differences, and Kale was determined to approach it with the strategic acumen and composure that the situation demanded. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as Kale moved with a sense of urgency, the soft hum of the ocean currents echoing through the palace. Each turn and passageway seemed to hold a growing sense of anticipation, underscoring the importance of the meeting that was about to take place. The weight of their shared destiny pressed heavily upon him, making every moment of preparation feel like a crucial step toward averting the impending catastrophe. With every passing second, Kale's anticipation grew, and the echoes of the prophecy reverberated in his mind. The alliance with Mara was no longer a matter of personal preference, but a necessity dictated by the fate of both kingdoms. The enormity of their task ahead was matched only by the urgency with which they needed to act. As the moment of their meeting approached, Kale steeled himself for the confrontation. The intricate beauty of Atlanteus Palace was a stark contrast to the gravity of their situation, and he knew that only by facing the impending threat together could they hope to safeguard their realms. The time for division was over. Now, it was time for an alliance forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. Mara and Kale's first encounter had been fraught with tension, each viewing the other with suspicion and hostility. Their initial meeting was marked by sharp words and defensive stances, a reflection of the deep-seated distrust between them. Now, however, their circumstances had shifted dramatically. As the threat of a shared disaster loomed, the need for collaboration forced them to confront their differences. The animosity that had colored their interactions would have to be set aside for the greater good. The sea serpent glided silently through the moonlit waters, its dark hull and billowing sails casting stark silhouettes against the glimmering surface. The ship approached a secluded cove near Atlanteus' borders, a quiet haven away from prying eyes. As the vessel anchored, Mara and her crew prepared for the arrival of their uneasy ally. The air was charged with a palpable sense of anticipation, a blend of nervous energy and reluctant hope that filled the atmosphere. On the rocky shoreline, Mara paced with a mixture of impatience and determination. Her usual confident demeanor was tempered by the gravity of the situation. She knew that this meeting with Kale was critical, not only for their personal alliances but for the survival of both their realms. Her crew, equally tense, moved with a subdued urgency, their eyes scanning the horizon for the first sign of the Mermaid Prince. From the depths of the ocean, Kale emerged with an air of regal composure. His scales, a shimmering blend of deep blues and silvers, caught the moonlight and reflected it in a mesmerizing display. Flanked by his elite guards, whose presence added to the formality of the occasion, Kale approached the cove with a commanding grace. The contrast between his elegant underwater attire and the rugged terrain of the cove highlighted the unusual nature of their alliance. As Kale stepped onto the rocky shore, the tension between him and Mara was almost tangible. Their eyes met across the divide of their respective worlds, a silent acknowledgement of the complexity of their situation. The Mermaid Prince's expression was a mixture of guarded professionalism and reluctant acceptance, while Mara's gaze was firm, her resolve evident despite the underlying uncertainty. The meeting ground, illuminated by the soft glow of the moon and the distant flicker of lanterns on the sea serpent, was an odd blend of natural beauty and nautical ruggedness. The sea's gentle lapping against the shore provided a rhythmic backdrop to the momentous occasion. As Mara and Cale prepared to address each other, the quiet murmur of the ocean seemed to underscore the significance of their collaboration. With a deep breath, Mara stepped forward to greet Cale, her voice steady but laced with the weight of their shared responsibility. "Prince Cale," she began, extending a hand in a gesture of tentative diplomacy. "Thank you for coming." Cale responded with a nod, his own tone measured and formal. "Captain Mara," he replied, his voice carrying the gravity of the situation. "We have much to discuss." The air between them was thick with unspoken challenges, but the necessity of their alliance was clear. As they moved to a more private area of the cove to continue their discussion, the shadows of the past lingered, but both Mara and Cale understood that their immediate focus had to be on preventing the looming disaster. The night's events marked the beginning of a complex partnership, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. Mara approached with a blend of wariness and determination, her posture taut with the readiness of a seasoned warrior. The dim moonlight cast a silvery glow over the secluded cove, highlighting her figure as she stood on the dock. Her hand rested casually on the hilt of her sword, a subtle but clear reminder of her readiness for any potential conflict. As she watched Cale emerge from the water, the prince's sleek, shimmering form cut through the darkness with an ethereal grace. Cale glided up to the dock with a regal composure, his scales reflecting the moonlight in a mesmerizing display of deep blues and silvers. The contrast between his elegant underwater presence and the rugged, moonlit shore emphasized the unusual nature of their meeting. His expression was one of careful diplomacy, tempered by the gravity of their situation. As he climbed onto the dock, his movements were fluid and deliberate, betraying none of the unease that might have accompanied such a rare encounter. Mara's voice broke the silence, steady and measured despite the tension that lingered in the air. "I never thought I'd be standing side by side with a mermaid prince," she said, her tone carrying a mix of grudging respect and wary curiosity. The words hung in the air, a reflection of the surreal reality they now faced. The weight of the prophecy and the necessity of their alliance were evident in her gaze, even as she maintained a controlled demeanor. Cale responded with a nod, his expression inscrutable, but his eyes reflecting the seriousness of the moment. "Yet here we are," he replied, his voice smooth and authoritative. "We must set aside our differences for now. The prophecy has given us no choice but to collaborate." His words conveyed both the urgency of their situation and a grudging acceptance of their forced partnership. As they prepared to discuss their next steps, the air between them was charged with the promise of a complex alliance forged under the shadow of impending crisis. Cale's gaze met Mara's with a mixture of skepticism and steely resolve, his eyes reflecting the moonlight as they locked onto hers. The tension between them was palpable, a thin line stretched taut by the circumstances that had brought them together. His sleek, azure scales shimmered under the moon's glow, adding an almost otherworldly quality to his presence. The dim light played across his face, highlighting the determination etched into his features. "The prophecy has made our paths cross in ways neither of us anticipated," Cale said, his voice calm yet underscored with a sense of urgency. His tone carried the weight of their shared predicament, and despite the stark differences between them, there was an unspoken recognition of the gravity of their situation. The calm waters of the cove seemed to echo his words, amplifying the seriousness of the discussion. Mara's stance was resolute, her hand still resting on her sword but now lowered in a gesture of tentative truce. She met Cale's gaze with a mixture of challenge and curiosity, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the torches that lined the dock. "We don't have the luxury of time to deal with old grievances," she replied, her voice steady but laced with the tension of their uneasy alliance. The sea whispered around them, a constant reminder of the world that lay between their disparate realms. Cale nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. "We must set aside our enmity and focus on the threat at hand," he continued, his voice unwavering. His expression was one of firm resolve, the seriousness of the situation evident in every line of his face. The shadows of the cove seemed to deepen as he spoke, underscoring the gravity of their mission. "If the assassination plot is as serious as it seems," Cale added, his gaze sweeping over the darkened waters, "it's in both our interests to uncover and prevent it." The urgency in his voice was tempered by a calculated calmness, a sign of his readiness to collaborate despite their conflicting backgrounds. The serene surface of the ocean belied the turbulent reality of their circumstances, creating a stark contrast to the tension of their conversation. Mara's features softened slightly, the intensity of her initial stance giving way to a grudging acceptance of the necessity of their alliance. "Agreed," she said, her voice carrying a note of reluctant cooperation. The moonlight continued to cast its silvery glow over the scene, highlighting the shared sense of responsibility that had emerged from their confrontation. Their mutual acknowledgement of the threat served as a bridge between their worlds, setting the stage for a tentative but crucial partnership. The quiet of the night was punctuated by the distant sounds of the sea, a reminder of the vast and unpredictable forces that lay beyond their immediate concerns. As they prepared to tackle the impending danger, the weight of their newfound alliance was felt deeply by both. As they turned to discuss their next steps, the interplay of light and shadow on the water seemed to mirror the complexity of their situation. The promise of cooperation hung in the air, mingling with the lingering remnants of their earlier conflict. The night around them was alive with the tension of what was to come, marking the beginning of an uneasy yet vital collaboration. The moonlight cast long, wavering shadows over the secluded cove as the two leaders stood facing each other. The silence between them was thick, laden with the weight of unspoken grudges and cautious respect. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the distant murmur of waves provided a rhythmic backdrop to their tense exchange. Mara's gaze was unwavering as she took a deep breath, the cool night air mixing with the resolve in her voice. "Agreed," she said, her tone firm and final. Her eyes locked onto Cale's, searching for any hint of insincerity or hesitation. The light from the torches flickered, casting a soft glow on her determined face and highlighting the seriousness of the situation. "But make no mistake, Cale, this alliance is a means to an end," Mara continued, her voice carrying the gravity of her words. The tension between her declaration and the fragile truce they had forged was palpable, a reminder of the underlying discord that still simmered beneath their cooperation. Her hand, which had momentarily rested on her sword, now lay by her side, a subtle gesture of both readiness and restraint. Cale's expression remained composed, his eyes reflecting the cool blue of the ocean as he considered her words. The moonlight played across his scales, creating an almost ethereal effect as he took in Mara's stance. "I understand," he replied, his voice steady and measured. The shadows around them seemed to deepen, accentuating the seriousness of their agreement and the uncertainty of their future interactions. As the words settled between them, a sense of cautious mutual respect began to form. The immediate threat had forged an alliance out of necessity, but the underlying tension was far from resolved. Cale's gaze remained fixed on Mara, his expression one of solemn acceptance as he acknowledged the terms of their partnership. The quiet of the cove seemed to close in around them, the sounds of the sea providing a constant reminder of the larger world beyond their uneasy alliance. The night was still, broken only by the occasional ripple of water against the shore and the faint crackle of the torches. The promise of future reassessment hung in the air, a reminder of the provisional nature of their cooperation. As they turned to begin their strategic planning, the weight of their agreement, and the complex dynamics of their relationship set the stage for the challenges ahead. The moon continued its silent vigil over the ocean, its silvery light a witness to the beginning of a fraught yet crucial partnership. As Mara and Kale embarked on their uneasy collaboration, the oppressive weight of the prophecy seemed to settle heavily over their efforts. The night was a silent witness to their tentative alliance, with the moon casting a pale glow over their surroundings. Both leaders were acutely aware of the high stakes involved. The fate of their realms hung precariously in the balance, the foreboding message of the prophecy echoing in their minds. The threats they faced were manifold and complex, each layer adding to the intricate puzzle they were determined to solve. Their combined forces would need to unravel a dense web of political intrigue and deception that spanned both the surface and the depths of the ocean. The challenge ahead was daunting, filled with hidden dangers and concealed motives that would require more than just bravery to overcome. Navigating this treacherous terrain demanded more than just strategic acumen. It required a delicate dance of diplomacy and trust between Mara and Kale. Their initial distrust and animosity had to be set aside as they pooled their resources and knowledge. The tension between them was palpable, but it was overshadowed by the pressing need to uncover the truth behind the assassination plot that threatened their worlds. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the complexity of the situation became increasingly apparent. Each clue they uncovered seemed to lead to more questions, further entangling them in a web of deceit. Their journey was marked by moments of frustration and uncertainty, but also by glimmers of understanding and cooperation as they learned to navigate their differences. Their efforts to uncover the truth were met with numerous obstacles, both from within their own ranks and from external forces seeking to thwart their progress. The alliance they had forged was tested at every turn, pushing both Mara and Kale to their limits. Trust, once a fragile concept, began to grow between them, tempered by the shared urgency of their mission. The path ahead was fraught with peril, each step a reminder of the looming disaster that the prophecy had foretold. Their combined strengths and strategic minds were their greatest assets as they worked to prevent the catastrophe that seemed to draw ever closer. The gravity of their task was never far from their thoughts, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. As they continued their efforts, Mara and Kale found themselves forging an unlikely bond amidst the chaos and danger. The challenges they faced were significant, but their shared goal provided a common ground on which to build a more profound understanding. Their alliance, though born of necessity, began to take on a deeper significance as they confronted their mutual adversaries. The night stretched on, and the prophecy's shadow continued to loom large over their journey. With each passing hour, the urgency of their mission grew more pronounced. The success of their alliance hinged on their ability to remain focused and resolute, even as the odds seemed stacked against them. As the moon dipped lower in the sky, Mara and Kale pressed forward with renewed determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but their resolve was unwavering. Together, they faced the looming disaster with a sense of purpose, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead in their quest to avert the prophecy's dark promise.